Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Just as I think to let everyone know who you all are, can we just go around the group and introduce yourself? Maybe Adriano, you could start.
Sure. My name is Adriano Alessandrini. I am a professor of transportation at the University of Florence, and it is sad to say, but I have been started working on automated mobility more than 20 years ago. We deployed our first fully automated vehicle in 1998. So we have quite some experience in actually putting people on automated vehicles and what should be done and what should not be done.
Okay, great.
My name is Jarosław Broda. I'm VP for Tauron, one of the largest Polish utilities, which is also active in this area with our heat generation distribution, and we're also developing some smart city solutions.
Okay.
And I'm Clare from What Three Words, and we basically decided it was time for a new addressing system. So we divided the world into a grid of 57 trillion squares and labelled each square with an address made of 3 words from the dictionary.
Wonderful. So let's start with a pretty big question. From your perspective, maybe Claire, you could pick this up first. What are the main challenges, and would love to hear your thoughts too, the main challenges you see going forward in terms of this billion people? How can we build sustainable but economically vibrant and coherent cities?
Yeah, I think one of the key challenges is efficiency of how we move people and things.
Yeah.
So when you've got billions of people living in cities, you have real challenges to move them around, but also to move the things around that they need. So mobility isn't just necessarily, and it's not just about the people, using car sharing, using things like taxi apps, driving their own cars. It's also about, on-demand services like delivery companies and so on. I think a critical thing is really when you're thinking about moving things from A to B, making that as efficient as possible, so reduce congestion, reduce emissions, make sure people don't get lost.
Sure. And do you think that a lot of what's happening in our cities at the moment is that kind of, we're seeing this kind of battle for the last mile going on, right? With all these kind of delivery companies, they're trying to win market share effectively, right?
Yeah, but you've also got this really interesting thing, which is that you've got really analog systems trying to work with really digital ones.
Yeah.
So maps is a great example. And maps have totally changed in the last 10 years. And they're now pretty much just digital, which is great.
Yeah.
And we can improve the map ridiculous rates all the time. The maps you look at a year from now will be incredibly good compared to the maps we have today. But what we haven't done is change things like addresses. So in our world, one of the problems you have is that you have really analog systems like street addresses, which were really designed for mail delivery a couple of 100 years ago, and you're trying to make that work with digital maps, and so you have this disconnect. So I think the big thing we need to think about is how we make new technologies work with the things that exist, the infrastructure that exists, and how you can bring them together a bit more closely.
Okay. Well, we have the Minister here, better late than never. Please welcome the President and Deputy Minister for the Environment, Michał Kurtyka. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. So, Adriano, maybe we can just sort of touch on what Claire was talking about. You've been working in this space for a long time. What are the crucial challenges that you feel that we're facing at the moment?
Well, in terms of sustainability, I have to say that the urban shape is the most crucial part. If you take, for example, 2 United States metropolis, New York on one coast, Los Angeles on the other. New York is very vertical.
Yes.
So it's very concentrated. And there, even if the United States is not the place for mass transit work. Because when you have a lot of concentrated demand, the tools that we already have proven to be effective. While if you go on the other coast, they are struggling more and more with private transport, more and more with congestion. Yeah. They have reached, I believe, 12 lanes on the M1 each direction, and they're still congested.
Yeah.
And this is probably the most difficult thing. When you have to travel long distances in ubiquitous directions, every time, you don't have way to concentrate demand, so you don't have room for traditional public transport. But then, you still need people to share their vehicles. Otherwise, they will share the streets and they will be all stopping. And when we talk about automating vehicles, expecting that technology would be the magic wand, or as the American says, the silver bullet, that solves every single problem, this is unrealistic. You cannot expect the automated vehicles to actually solve at the same time congestion, safety, security, pollution, and all the issues. There must be some political, some policy decision, some push toward trying and force or convince people to share more. Whether they are automated or manual, it doesn't matter. Automation must be an enabler. So something that will help people to get the right vehicle at the right moment will not need to be the goal. And this is how you actually make more sustainable our living together. As long as we live in the countryside, with a lot of space around, it doesn't matter the way we move around. We never cause congestion. We cannot congest ourselves.
Sure.
But if we live all in the same environment, and actually 7.5 billion people on this small planet, it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And if we all have the Western lifestyle, it would mean a lot of congestion everywhere, unless we learn to respect the space of the other.
Yeah.
It's 7.5 billion people on Earth, and like 55% of them living in the cities, which is 3% of the areas of the Earth. So the problem is even much bigger. And while I fully agree that the technology does not solve the problem itself, I don't think that we can make people or order them to share. We have to design the cities in a way that people would like to do that. And I like to think about the cities as a cluster of clusters on a very different level. One of the level is a spatial planning. You've got different districts and they create all of the city. And you can go both ways. You can have specialized districts and everybody going to the business center during the day and going back. Or you can build more self-sustainable district, which itself are kind of a small city. And then you really optimize the flow of the people throughout the city. And this metaphor of the clusters goes even farther. As in terms of environmental footprint, there's like 70-80% of CO2 generated in the cities. If you reduce transportation, if you build also energy sustainable cities, so you've got solar panels, you've got thin films on the windows. If you've got green buildings, which itself can absorb CO2 and provide a comfort from the people in the city, and by the way, reduce also the temperature, that's the way how you enhance the people. But in order to do that, what you need is a long-term responsible planning with bold goals, bold political goals, as Professor
I'd love to bring the minister in at this point, because I think your thoughts will be pertinent. Each of the panelists so far has really talked about sort of the behavioural and social changes that we're going to need to make. From your perspective, how can we incentivise people so that our mega cities of the future are functional and economically thriving?
Well, that's a question for $1 million. But thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here. As I will be responsible for running COP24, which is the big climate summit which will be held in this same building in 3 months' time, it's a great opportunity for us to introduce what's going on during the climate summit. So right now my job is to travel across the world to hear voices and to talk with decision makers about how they imagine the world in 20, 30, 50 years' time. Of course, with the climate dimension, but it touches so many other issues that are crucial for our functioning. I went to New Delhi discussing with my counterpart, Minister of Environment, Dr. Harshvardhan, and then we had this discussion. At the beginning of 19th century, 1 out of 50 people living on the planet was living in a city. By 2050, 2 out of 3 people will be living in a city. Humanity will be completely in another dimension in only 200 years. And when I see New Delhi and Bangkok, because these were 2 cities that I have visited last week, and you can imagine a world in which clean air, silence, drinking water might become luxuries. And I agree with you because we discussed also about arithmetics. When you see that there are 50 cars for 1,000 people living in India, and in Poland we have 500 cars, and in US over 800 cars per 1,000 inhabitants, then you imagine, then I think our imagination is it's out of imagination. I cannot imagine 10 times more cars on the streets of New Delhi than I saw 1 week ago or in Bangkok. And I think that people in these countries realize it also. And we discussed about technology. And of course, India, for example, has a very ambitious tentative goal of having 35 to 40% of electric vehicles by 2030. But interesting conversation, and this is what will echo what you said. Technology change is easy. Behavioral change.
Yeah.
It's all about.
Yeah.
If we are able to bring all these people into public transportation, public electric transportation, or shared mobility, then we have won the battle.
Yeah. Clare, the Minister talked about New Delhi, talked about Bangkok, cities that I've been to recently as well. And we're seeing the shift from agricultural to industrial in many cities across the world, and developing world. Part of your remit, I think, is to ensure that there's inclusivity and that there is this drive towards people having kind of a level playing field. Do you maybe want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, and I think, as the Minister was saying, you said at the beginning, all over the world. And I think that's a really critical thing. I think often we talk about things that were designed in San Francisco and things that were designed in London or Berlin, and these are not the cities where most people are living. It's thinking about places like India and Kenya and China. And I think there's some really interesting opportunity to look at the way technology is being leapfrogged in a lot of these areas. So just like a while ago when we looked at mobile phones and the way, in a lot of countries that were seen as developing countries, they basically skipped out landlines and went straight to mobile phones, and actually adoption was very, very fast. And I think this is what you can see with mobility tech. So look at the way India is doing shared mobility and has been doing shared mobility for ages in really, really interesting ways, because they had to. They've had the need that's greater. And our technology, for example, it's now used all over the world, and recently it was put into Mercedes cars. But before it was put in Mercedes cars, the government of Mongolia adopted it as an official addressing system. And that's fascinating, because that's a country where they've basically gone, we are going to leapfrog. We're not going to use this old-fashioned addressing system that everyone else designed a couple of hundred years ago. We're going to go straight to something new, something that's designed that Mongolia has an incredibly young population, has incredibly high smartphone penetration, and they've been able to basically leapfrog and go ahead. And I think we've got a lot to learn from the way that people move around the world, and not just thinking, how can we take a piece of tech that was designed in Silicon Valley and implant it in India, but do the opposite as well.
So none of this is going to happen, Philip, without utilities. How do you see the role of utilities moving forward in these vast urban areas?
I'll just jump to that, but you just provoked me with the smartphone comment. Look at Uber. Extremely convenient, right? Successful business story. Does it improve the transportation system in the city? No, because it is really proved by the numbers that with Uber and this last mile service, in fact, the number of travelers by cars increases in the city, because it's so easy to get the car when you need it, right? And at the same time, you could use any public transportation. So we have to think in systems, as you mentioned before, and we have to put together systems so that they create the most sustainable way of transportation and moving. And what's the role of utility? What we can provide is the basic infrastructure and the basic technology, and help to widespread the 5G, IoT, to help the cities with gathering knowledge, data, and analyze the data in order to manage the city better. There are already solutions where you can manage the traffic according to the level of the pollution in different parts of the city. And you can go even deeper with that kind of solutions. And I think it's a first social responsibility of the utility to do that. And on the other hand, it's a business that we can do. And it's real CSR, because that's something that's a business, and that's really helpful for the cities and the comfort of living.
Adriano, I'd like to come to you at this point. You said you were working on autonomous vehicles since 1998. Where are we in that journey? And do you think that autonomous vehicles, cars as we now know them, is that the solution, or is it going to be more different options?
Well, thank you very much for this question. First, because it gives me the possibility to say that I don't like the word autonomous. I don't think automated vehicles should ever be autonomous. They should not think for themselves. They should be very careful planned, they should be very well engineered, but they shouldn't be autonomous in deciding anything. Somebody must have thought before. And yes, they can be the solution, but they cannot be the solution for everything everywhere. For example, we were discussing before about the size and the shape of the city. It makes a difference how big the city is and where you are in the city. If you are in Manhattan, using any form of surface transport, whether automated, manual, shared, it doesn't matter. It's crazy because there is the metro and you need to use that. And if there were not, you should build one. Because this is the right way of doing things because you have such a concentration of demand at all times of the day, day and night, that you have the demand to actually sustain that. Tokyo is the perfect example for that. This is a 30 million megacity, but in the center, nobody goes by car because everything is so well connected by public transport that it works perfectly. Where is that Tokyo? Even Tokyo is not working well. When you go in the outskirts, because there you cannot go with a train every single house. And so there you need to integrate, and this is where automated vehicles really help. Because if I can just call a vehicle, not my personal vehicle, not an individual vehicle, a shared vehicle, but if I can call a vehicle, a 10-passenger vehicle, that can pick up me at my place and deliver me with my 9 neighbors to the train station exactly at the time in which the train is leaving, and believe me, in Tokyo, they leave exactly at the right time, not like in Italy. And so you can actually extend the perfect service to the outskirts where today it's impossible to have such a perfect service. And this is where automated vehicle could really improve sustainability. If on the other hand, we expect the automated vehicle to bring us from our doorstep at the periphery of Tokyo to the city center of Tokyo, it would be a nightmare. Where is it that the autonomous car, as it is called, could not make such damages? Not in Tokyo. But for example, here around, the city is large, but is not very high-rise. Mm-hmm. And this is where there could be room for individual, or better if shared in peak hour, but still, I mean, it can change the way in which the vehicle is owned, so it can be used individually, to go from doorstep to doorstep. So depending on the urban shape, depending on how spread it is, depending on the form of the urban environment, the solutions will change. There is not one perfect solution for everything. There will be different solutions. However, the sustainable city is where the demand, where things are more concentrated. Mm-hmm. So that if I want to eat a pizza in New York, I don't need to travel the whole city. I just go downstairs, I'll find a pizzeria every corner. Because there's so much demand that you have demand to have a pizzeria every corner. And if I don't like the one which is in my corner, I just walk 2 blocks and there is a better one. So this kind of concentrating demand, this kind of concentrating human beings, it's more sustainable. If on the other hand, we try to make sustainable a 50 kilometers long city like it is for Los Angeles or greater Los Angeles, this is much more complex.
Yeah. Minister, I'd like to bring you in at this point. We've heard some of the challenges from the group. Government budgets are obviously limited. How do you prioritize? How do you make decisions about what should be first and what maybe can be left maybe to the private sector or other areas?
Well, I think we do not ask anymore the question what can be left to the private sector. I mean, governments are helpless, cannot work without the private sector. So the whole thing is to create the right framework in which private sector can thrive and can propose innovation. It's not for the state to bring solution, for the state to understand the future in a way of building appropriate regulatory framework. This is what we have done here in Poland. There is a law on electromobility. There is a dedicated fund on electric low-emission mobility with more than 10 billion zlotys, which will be going to this purpose for the coming 10 years. So I think that in this regard, Poland can be one of the leaders in the world of this electromobility mobility revolution. But I think that, first of all, we will be concentrating on the switch from internal combustion engine to alternative fuels, electric fuels, maybe later on hydrogen, certainly partly gas, etc. But then, I agree completely with you, the next big question, the next big challenge is autonomous vehicle. And when we think of the future, we always extrapolate somehow the past. It's the same when people first started to design cars in the beginning of 20th century, in the last years of 19th century. They were copying, in fact, a carriage. And today, we are thinking of an autonomous vehicle as we are thinking of a car, but without a driver. But in fact, I agree with you, it will be probably different. We will probably have different niches, like shuttles, 8, 10 people shuttle. And the question is what impact it will have on urban development. We will be able to be transported with less efforts from farther to the city center. So probably our future cities will be even bigger. Tokyo, 40 million people, Los Angeles, another big metropolis. Whether that is the future of cities with intermodality, with lots of different kinds of... I would like to imagine a city in this regard, and I like very much the last born startup in California, which is Bird, when you can drive an electric trolley, and that is serving probably the last mile or the last half of the mile. Yeah. But then all the distance must be somehow also managed.
If I can just give a very quick comment. I loved what you said about the government needing to regulate, not to intervene. But it is absolutely, when you are planning your frameworks, it is absolutely essential to plan ahead and decide beforehand what you want to be the future of your country. Because this allows you to prepare a framework in which then there will be some private models, some private business models, which are incentivized, and some others which are less incentivized, less welcome. And this is the only way in which you can actually keep the country and Europe sustainable, by thinking ahead. And it is absolutely beautiful to hear that you are thinking on these lines, because we do need politicians that are able to think 20 years ahead.
Claire, thank you very much. Just one thing. It is a very challenging issue that you have just raised.
It is.
Having a vision in politics is not always easy. And imagining, projecting ourselves in the future, I think there are lots of risks on the way. But I think that if we are to design the right, appropriate framework in which public and private can work together, we must have the courage to imagine the future.
Let's have a final word from the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly that. I think when it's that imagination, and we have the opportunity now to rethink how we've done things, and shared mobility, and actually technologies like voice allow us to think much more accessibly. So think about elderly people who right now often lose their license, and they're not able to be mobile in the city because they lose their license, they can't drive. If you're visually impaired, you may never have been able to drive. And as we think about autonomous vehicles or automated vehicles, and we think about technologies like voice, you've suddenly got this opportunity for cities to be more accessible to somebody who has never been able to drive before. So I think this reimagining, it's really important we're reimagining that for everyone, whether that's thinking about India and the UK and Poland, or whether that's thinking about people who've maybe been excluded in traditional mobility who are going to be able to access it now.
Claire, thank you. We're out of time. Thank you to the panel. Thank you for all your work on defining the cities of the future. We all have to be thinking in this room 20 years ahead, which isn't easy, but I'm sure as a group we can do it. Thank you, panel.